Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the offshore wind opportunity, lessons learned from the United Kingdom. I'm Rhona Cohen, Program Manager of our Energy and Environment Program at CSG East, and we have a really terrific and distinguished group of panelists today. And I just want to give a shout out to Kristen Kelleher at the British Consulate General in Boston for helping to organize today's session. And I'd also like to thank our speakers who are joining us from the Northeastern US as well as the UK. And at CSG, I'd like to thank my colleagues who are working behind the scenes to make things run smoothly today, Jack Aitken and Allison Braver. We are recording this event and it will be posted on our website later this week. And we'll have a Q&A session following our presentations, at which time you can click on the raise your hand function to ask questions. You can also submit questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At CSG East, we are sponsoring this event through our recently formed State Legislative Climate Alliance, which is open to all CSG members throughout the US and to our Canadian International Associate members. The Alliance provides nonpartisan education, best practices, and innovative state policy solutions to help officials address the challenges posed by climate change. And so to kick us off, I am really pleased to turn it over to the founding chair of our State Legislative Climate Alliance, Massachusetts State Senator Mark Pacheco, the Dean of the Massachusetts Senate. Senator Pacheco has been a tremendous supporter of CSG and a leader on climate and clean energy policy at CSG and in the state of Massachusetts. And among his many roles in Massachusetts, Senator Pacheco is the founding chair and current member of the Standing Senate Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change. Senator Pacheco, I thank you for your leadership, and I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Rhona. I want to begin by thanking Rhona Cohen, all of the staff at CSG for the amazing work that they do each and every day, in particular with our Energy and Environmental Committee, and this new initiative that we have kicked off with the CSG US State Legislative Climate Alliance. This program today, the Offshore Wind Opportunity, Lessons Learned from the United Kingdom, is one of the many, many forums we are planning on doing to focus in on issues that will help us achieve the requirements that we need to achieve here in Massachusetts, but also the requirements that people will want to have if we want to solve the worst effects of global warming and climate change. So I want to thank everyone who has tuned in today to this forum. It is exciting. And I think everyone will enjoy the presentations that we will have from our friends in the UK. One of the co-chair with me for the Energy and Environmental Committee is Senator Formica, and I'm going to ask him to say a few words in just a minute, but I'd like to introduce him to you. Senator Formica is currently serving his third term in the Connecticut State Senate. He is the Deputy Senate Republican leader, and among other roles, he serves as the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee and on the Energy and Technology Committee. Senator Formica is also the owner of Flanders Fish Market and Restaurant, which I've got to get to sometime, in East Limey, Connecticut, which has been in operation for some 35 years now. So let me turn it over to Senator Formica for his welcoming comments. Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Pacheco, and thank you for the kind introduction. Rhona, again, great job as always, and to the staff, and recognizing the fact that, you know, CSG is a leading voice in government communication, collaboration, and simply sharing issues of understanding that are important to the day for governments, you know, around the country, and specifically here on the East Coast. Our Eastern Energy and Environmental Committee is looking very closely at the next generation of energy generation. Offshore wind is going to be a big player in that. And this new and emerging industry is exciting, not only for Massachusetts and New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, but the entire eastern seaboard as we're looking to move really into the future of how do we manage and maintain renewable energy to make it a good baseload option for us. You know, we have great leaders on the Energy Committee. I'm proud to serve with Chairman Arconti and Neilman, who are, I think, on the call today. And you know, we certainly look forward to hearing from our friends in UK about their experience that they're going to share with us today, so that we have a better understanding of the path forward. And I'm very appreciative of the speakers today and that are taking the time to come and kind of educate us as to how we move forward with this exciting new industry. So I hope you all enjoy what we have in store for you. And as you heard, Senator Pacheco has been, you know, a strong leader and innovator in this sector. So, Senator, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Formica, for your leadership as well. And I know your keen interest in offshore wind, given your district and all the issues that are taking place there in Connecticut and up and down the east coast of America, and soon to be the west coast as well. So we look forward to the presentation that we will be having from our friends from the UK. And as such, it's a great opportunity for me to introduce Dr. Peter Abbott, the British Consul General in New England. Dr. Abbott has been a member of Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service for 15 years. The UK, as many know, is hosting the International Climate Conference in November, also known as COP26. Dr. Abbott has been working with key stakeholders across New England to encourage climate action and clean energy collaboration with UK interlocutors ahead of November and beyond. I've had the opportunity to speak with him briefly, and I look forward to his presentation today. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter Abbott, British Consul General to New England. Dr. Abbott.
Senator Pacheco, thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction. Senator Formica, thank you, Rhona, thank you, Jack and Alison behind the scenes. Thank you to the Council for State Governments for such a generous invitation today to come and talk to you about the UK's, the work that the UK is doing in offshore wind, both in the UK and in New England and indeed the wider northeast region of the United States. I just want to start by really setting the context. Why is it important that we're here to talk about offshore wind today? And the context is this: the hottest years on record were all in the last decade, with 2020 the hottest year ever recorded since records began. And what does that, what does that really mean? We hear a lot of these statistics bandied around, but what does that really mean in practice? Well, in New England, it means increased rainfall, increasingly violent storms, rising sea levels affecting cities like Boston, the city that I am sitting in today. It means decreased crop yields in some of New England's most iconic foods. Maple syrup, for example. The sugar maple trees are moving slowly, very slowly forward up into Canada, looking for colder climates as New England warms. It's affecting the blueberry harvest and it's affecting lobster populations off the coast of Maine. Climate change and global warming also affect tourism. New England is famous for its beautiful leaves in the autumn. Climate change will reduce the impact of those colours. It will also reduce the ability for New England to host winter sports such as skiing, as warmer winters mean fewer days of snow and more expensive requirements to produce for ski resorts to produce their own snow. And it will also mean an impact on iconic species. Because of the warmer winters, the tick population in New England is no longer being killed off every winter. And because ticks are around year-round now, it's affecting populations of moose who are being literally eaten alive by ticks in New England because they are not being killed off by the cold winters. So climate change is having a very, very real, very tangible impact on New England, the region that I represent the UK in today. So we need solutions, and in the UK, we think that offshore wind is right at the heart of our green industrial revolution and our attempts to reduce our emissions in the run-up to COP26. That's as we've just heard, we'll be hosting in November in Glasgow. The UK has the largest amount of installed offshore wind capacity anywhere in the world, and will soon have the world's single largest offshore wind farm. As part of that green industrial revolution that I was talking about, the UK government has invested £12 billion and expects that number to be tripled by private investment over the course of the coming years. We think that investment will generate around 250,000 what we're calling green collar jobs. And that economic development angle to offshore wind and clean energy is one that I will return to a little bit later. But suffice to say for now, some studies say that for every dollar that you invest in the clean energy transition, you can expect to get between $3 and $8 return in economic benefits. I think what's exciting about speaking to you now is that the United States is really poised on the edge of a similar clean energy revolution, with New England and the Northeast leading the way. Vineyard Wind, the Vineyard Wind project off the coast of Massachusetts, was approved by BOEM on the 11th of May, and that will be America's first industrial scale offshore wind farm. Of course, Rhode Islanders, if we have any on the call today, will remind us that Block Island off the coast of Rhode Island was America's first offshore wind farm, but Vineyard Wind will be the first industrial scale offshore wind farm, providing power for up to 400,000 homes in Massachusetts. And I think what's important about this, I think it illustrates that we're at a tipping point. The cost of offshore wind is plummeting. Over the last 7 or so years in the UK, we've seen the cost of offshore wind electricity drop by about 60%. So it really is no longer an expensive alternative to energy. It really is swiftly becoming one of the cheapest sources of energy. And in fact, in the UK in August last year, we saw a full 60% of the UK's energy mix coming from offshore and onshore wind. That's 60%. It's a remarkably high figure. And, you know, I say the US is poised on the edge of this revolution. It's not just New England, it's New York, it's New Jersey, it's Virginia, and increasingly it's also California as well. So I want to say a few words now about what the British Consulate in Boston is doing to support this industry. What is the UK's role in New England? And I've got several areas that I just want to highlight for you today. The first one is a unique climate and partnership agreement that we signed with the state of Maine just before Christmas at the end of last year. This climate and energy partnership is a really unique relationship between the UK and Maine, and it's the only memorandum of understanding that we have signed with a US state on offshore wind and clean energy. And I think that reflects several things about the state of Maine. As we know, the Gulf of Maine has some very high quality wind resource. I think it's also because there is some really, really world-class academic and research and development work going on at the University of Maine, primarily on floating offshore wind. There's an extensive maritime infrastructure in Maine, and it has proximity to one of the largest energy markets in the world. But also it's because Maine has really high quality and committed political leadership on offshore wind, and that's absolutely vital for any offshore wind industry to develop anywhere in the world. You have to have the right political leadership. So that partnership that we signed with Maine at the end of last year commits us to sharing technology on clean energy and offshore wind, to facilitating better academic and research links between the UK and Maine, and doing the same for business to ensure that the offshore wind industry can deliver prosperity and economic development across the state of Maine and in the UK. The second thing that we're doing is setting up a variety of partnerships, and I'm delighted that Alan Loudon is on the call today, and he will be able to say more about some of these partnerships when we come to him. But at the heart of these partnerships is the memorandum of understanding that we have signed with Bristol Community College in Massachusetts. That is a MOU which is designed to support workforce development. We have two British companies, JDR Cables and Catch UK, that are working with Bristol Community College to set up workforce development and skills training, which is really, I think, a really important part of the offshore wind picture. Alan has also been, he'll be too modest to say this, but he's also been fundamental in helping Bristol Community College set up the National Offshore Wind Institute, providing leadership and skills training to get that off the ground. Alan also works with a group called the Team Humber Marine Alliance, and they've been working with the state of Rhode Island, with Commerce Rhode Island, to help develop Rhode Island's offshore wind strategy and look at some of their supply chain issues as well. And I'm also excited about the growing partnership that we have with New Hampshire. So New Hampshire in the last few months has set up a new offshore wind industry development office to look at the benefits that offshore wind might have for the state of New Hampshire. Now, it does have the shortest coastline of any of the New England states, but that is not holding back Governor Sununu and his team from looking at how offshore wind can benefit New Hampshire. So again, the UK is there helping provide advice to the Granite State. We're also sharing our experience, and I just want to highlight two areas where we are doing that. First, our experience in developing port infrastructure and looking at how clustering of industries around a particular port can help drive economic development. We've got quite a lot of experience in this area, drawing on our deep sea oil and gas industry experience over many decades. The second area where we're sharing our experience is on the fishing industry, and particularly the relationship between the renewable energy and offshore wind industry and the fishing industry, because as many of you on the line will know, that relationship has not always been the easiest one. And we have several decades of experience in the UK of bringing the fishing and renewable energies industries together into a much more fruitful relationship where that economic prosperity, the economic dividend from offshore wind can be shared more equitably. We've also got quite a lot of activity going on with the British private sector, obviously bringing British supply chain companies into New England to help support the New England offshore wind industry. We're also running a series of business delegations from the UK, primarily from what we call the Northern Powerhouse region, which is in the north of England, to look at where they can invest here in the US and again support that growing offshore wind industry. And finally, the UK is also funding, to the tune of several £million, a number of research and development projects, including with the University of Tufts in Massachusetts and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute also in Massachusetts. So there's quite a lot of UK research and development funding coming in to support that industry in New England. So I'm going to wrap up. We've got Alan Loudon, as I've said, and Melanie On coming up, and they are far more expert in this area than I am. So I'm really looking forward to handing over to them. But just in conclusion, I just wanted to say that I think investing in clean energy now is absolutely critical to overall economic development. From 1990 to 2018, the UK cut its emissions by 43%, whilst our economy grew by 75%. Building these jobs, these clean, sustainable, highly paid, highly skilled jobs, I think is really at the heart of any state or any country's future economic development plans. So clean energy, the clean energy transition, I think makes moral sense. As I set out the case at the beginning, it makes the right moral sense in the sense of our stewardship of this planet, but it also makes very, very sound economic sense. And as Senator Formica said, it's exciting too. So we can, we can be excited and positive about all of the opportunities that this industry has to offer New England, the Northeast, and the United States more broadly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Dr. Peter Abbott, British Consul General to New England. We thank you for your leadership, and we thank you for your enthusiasm representing the UK and bringing your knowledge and resources to the table. I think you're right, Consul General, we are on the cusp of a sustainability revolution. And for many here in New England and in America, the offshore wind industry is a new industry, but it is not so throughout the world, and certainly in the UK, and we thank you. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Loudon. Dr. Alan Loudon is the Director of Strategic Development for the National Offshore Wind Institute at Bristol Community College, right here in Massachusetts, where he formulates and implements the strategic plans for the creation of the Global Wind Organization Accredited Offshore Wind Training Center. Dr. Loudon has more than 20 years of experience in the offshore wind industry. In addition to his role at Bristol Community College, he is a professor in practice at the University of Durham and also serves as chair of the advisory board of Durham University in the area of energy. So Dr. Loudon, it's an honor to have you with us today, and I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Alan Loudon.
Thank you, Senator Pacheco, much appreciated. Okay, so basically the slide in front of you was just to demonstrate the connectivity which already exists between the activities which are underway that yours truly is involved in. So as Senator Pacheco has already mentioned, I'm Director of Strategic Development at the National Offshore Wind Institute at Bristol Community College in New Bedford. And that's coupled with Professor in Practice role at Durham University, and also a role which I'm very proud to play for the British government, which is to identify early stage companies and get them to collaborate with their UK counterparts. So it's called the Global Entrepreneur Program for the Department for International Trade. So basically, this is a culmination of over 17 years of effort, bringing the two sides of the pond together in an innovation and entrepreneurship way. Next slide, please. Okay, so the format of today's talk, I wanted to introduce you to a very important concept. So it's the levelized cost of energy. And why is this concept so important? What are the UK experiences in it, and what must the US do to position from a strategic point of view to take advantage of its position coming into the market at a very attractive point in the levelized cost of energy migration. I'll then speak a little bit about workforce development, and that includes direct jobs which are generated, and also supply chain opportunities, which we term indirect jobs, and what that's done to stimulate the creation of the National Offshore Wind Institute. And then I'll take you through some of my historical involvement in some of the things that Peter's already mentioned about UK-US RD&I collaboration, research, development, and innovation collaboration, historical, and also bring that bang up to date with what's going on today. And I'll leave you with some real food for thought, which is the US's position in the floating offshore wind sector, which is the next frontier, in how it can help shape this industry globally going forward from where we sit today. Okay, so going through into the levelized cost of energy, and you'll understand why I've introduced this slide in a little while. So the levelized cost of energy is a terminology which is used extensively in the offshore wind industry, and it basically it's an equation which is the life cycle cost of energy production in dollars divided by how much energy you actually produce from your assets over the course of their life in megawatt hours. So levelized cost of energy is dollars per megawatt hour. So the game that we're in terms of the offshore wind industry game, is all about minimizing the numerator, the bit on the top, and maximizing the denominator. And if you do that, you will keep both levelized cost of energy in check, and you will also create opportunities. So minimizing the numerator really is about optimizing the amount of operations and maintenance which you expend on your asset stock through strategic asset management planning. And there's lots of great technology transfer opportunities from other sectors in this area. So I'll come on to that later on. You must also reduce risk, and that's perceived risk and also actual risk, because the risk manifests itself in the cost of capital, so how much money you can borrow at what rates, and also in the insurance premiums that you pay for your asset stock once it's created. And in doing all this, we deploy the most advanced technologies we can to understand the performance of assets such that the life cycle cost of energy production is minimized. On the bottom of the equation, the denominator, we are increasingly using larger turbines, because larger turbines per unit produce more power. If you double the length of a turbine blade, you increase its power output by a factor of 4. So you can see if a blade goes from 10 meters length to 20 meters length, which is something which has happened a long time ago, then the power output increases proportionately. But now we're looking at 120 meter length blades, so you can see that the levelized cost of energy has been positively impacted by the increase in turbine size. We must also keep these assets going for longer, creating greater yield from the turbines, which means that the operations and maintenance point I made earlier is very relevant to the energy produced from these assets. So understanding how they're performing increases their yield, because we're able to maintain them more proactively and keep the turbines spinning for longer. And we need to increase and make the assets more resilient over time. So that means better materials, it means better performing power electronics, those types of things. So you can see the turbine is becoming a very important factor in the levelized cost of energy equation. But all of this, it's all well and good, but it must and does drive behaviors, it drives focus, it drives economic development, and it also creates a significant number of jobs in line with what Peter mentioned earlier. So in terms of levelized cost of energy dynamics, the UK around about 2014 was at an equivalent LCOE figure of around about $210 per megawatt hour. That's now sitting at approximately 60. So that's a significant reduction in 7 years. And it's come about because of the things that I've already mentioned. But in terms of the US entering the industry at this point at a very attractive levelized cost of energy figure, then we must be aware of the specifics that the US industry faces. In the North Sea, for example, we don't have to endure hurricanes. We have got very little, if any, seismic exposure. The unionization, which was once in place in the UK, no longer exists to the same degree. And in the United States, you have this potential roadblock, which will be navigated, we all know, called the Jones Act, which is a specific ocean faring act which needs to be adhered to and needs to be respected, but also needs to be maybe adapted to take into consideration the way that the industry will initially be structured. And by doing all of this, we need to inadvertently increase, in a US terms, the LCOE in the early days to avoid negative press, to avoid people actually looking at the industry through the wrong lens. The offshore renewable energy certificate system in the United States was extremely popular and extremely successful as a taxation incentive for onshore wind and for early stage offshore wind. That's now been replaced, and there's more risk enwrapped into the power purchase agreements. And typically what we're seeing quoted in the United States terms at this point in time are LCOE figures in the range of $80 to $110 per megawatt hour. That will continue to evolve and continue to change as time marches forward, as this industry develops. But it's important as we go forward in the next 3 or 4 slides to have this concept of levelized cost of energy firmly in your mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so the workforce development side, the supply chain side, and what stimulated the creation of the National Offshore Wind Institute is extremely important to understand as well. We're already in this market, and we want to create more, and we want to create better jobs, higher paying jobs, greater longevity jobs, more professional jobs, things that people can aspire to. So back in 2018, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center undertook a workforce development study in which it used an example of 1.6 gigawatts of installed capacity going into the Massachusetts immediate offshore wind zone and being constructed over an 8-year period. The outputs from that study were quite interesting in the sense that it predicted that around 7,000 to 10,000 direct and indirect jobs would be created during the construction phase of these assets, which is the CapEx phase, capital expenditure phase, but between 700 and 1,700 would be created annually, and that's the important thing, annually, in the OpEx phase, which is fundamentally the operations and maintenance phase. So over the nominal 25-year design life of a wind farm, we're looking at between 17 as a lower bound, 17,500, and as an upper bound, 42,500 jobs being created in the operations and maintenance phase. Now, you have to remember that as soon as you construct one turbine in the ocean, the operations and maintenance period starts because the warranties on the turbine kick in. So you could be constructing hundreds of turbines still, or the construction schedule could still have hundreds of turbines to go, but the minute that you put one in the ocean, connected, and it starts spinning, then the warranty period cuts in, and that means the operations and maintenance phase cuts in. So these jobs are running concurrently. So in response to all of this, the National Offshore Wind Institute was postulated as something which was required by Bristol Community College. And we have developed that over the last 4 years. I've been involved for 2 years, and we've created we've identified, a site in Massachusetts at the New Bedford waterfront, 30,000 square foot building, which is currently being renovated and going through the permitting process to change its use. It will be operational in 2022, and it's received significant Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and Massachusetts government support. In the summer of 2020, cognizant of the fact that we needed to bring a brand on board to help us develop this, we hired Maersk Training of Denmark, but we hired its UK team to help us design, do the purchasing of the equipment. So the procurement of the equipment that goes into the center is undertaken at the moment, and we've had 2 containers which have recently arrived at the site from the UK. We're going to engage in a train the trainer program, and there's lots of local firefighters who are chomping at the bit to be trained in the offshore wind, the ways of offshore wind, so they can go off and service these assets. But the important thing for the remainder of this year is the certification of the NAWI to GWO, Global Wind Organization standards. Initially, we're going to be running 2 programs, which is basic safety training. We'll also be running basic technical training. Both of these, if you're going to work on the engineering side of the turbines, clearly you need basic technical training. If you're going to inspect the turbines or you're going to just visit the turbines, you need basic safety training. The GWO certifications are extremely important, but they don't just sit there. There are several, probably of the order of 50 GWO courses, which are available in relation to the offshore wind environment. And we will be producing these courses over time. We'll be phasing them in such that the whole spectrum of opportunity is placed in front of the potential workforce. But to get us going, we've got to do something. So while we're waiting for the certification and the trainer programs, etc., to be rolled out, we're raising awareness of opportunities for the the supply chain through continuous professional development courses. So you'll see increasingly advertised the courses which I've been designing and I'll be bringing to life, which are in relation to other industries who might be interested or considering coming into the offshore wind sector. So the service sectors, other safety critical industries, professional services firms have all got a role to play in the industry, and heightening awareness of how they do that is increasingly important to develop this indigenous supply chain that the US needs to develop, and which it will over time be so reliant on. So we're talking about hotel owners, caterers, IT companies, logistics companies, food and drink, transportation, Ubers, other taxi firms, lawyers, financiers, insurers. They're all got a role to play in this and are so essential in the industry coming to life. And this is often overlooked at the expense of people, or the view that people should just be interested in the technical side of the industry. It's not the case. There's something in this for everyone. So in addition to the workforce development side, in 2022, I'll be designing and bringing to life the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center for the NAWI. And this will be an opportunity for people who are identifying issues in the industry to conceive ideas and get support to bring those ideas from a concept through to full commercial deployment. So it will be a nurturing ground, an accelerator, an incubator environment in partnership with Venture Cafe Providence, where we're already exploring how that might look. UMass Dartmouth, University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, Tufts, we've already mentioned, but we'll also be bringing my alma mater into this, Durham Business School, Durham University's Engineering Department, and other UK universities of relevance. The UK relationships are also extremely important for the NAWI. And what we've been able to do is to introduce a US entity, the NAWI, to US organizations who it was previously not in contact with. So we now have great relationships with the National Renewable Energy Lab, the Department of Energy, the University of Colorado at Boulder, which is very close to my heart with my Global Entrepreneur Program hat on. So all of this is really a melting pot for relationship development from one side of the pond to the other. So it's really exciting to see this unfurl. And bearing in mind that I've been working on these relationships for about 17 years, it's not just happened overnight. And it's great to be able to drop things onto the table for people to take advantage of today. Next slide, please. So Peter's already mentioned UK research, development, and innovation. So I'll pull out one or two of these points on here. The legacy of collaboration is long established. I was a signatory to the collaborative R&D agreement, the CRADA, between the then National Renewable Energy Centre and NREL's Wind Technology Testing Center in Charlestown in Boston in 2006, 2007. We replenished that and we refreshed it, and it ran till 2016. And it was based upon personnel exchange and intellectual property exchange, joint patenting of testing technologies, and it worked extremely well. And today, those relationships still persist. Back to the levelized cost of energy, this has been a huge focus of RDI activity between the two nations. And I'll pull out some of the numbers which I mentioned in passing earlier. Installation logistics account for about 11% of the levelized cost of energy. Operations and maintenance, 28%. So that's a big figure to attack with new thinking and new technologies. But increasingly, project financing has risen to the top. As more risky projects have come to the fore, then the cost of capital has gone up. But as more technology is deployed to reduce that risk, that cost of capital reduces. But a very interesting fact here, which is something which has befallen the Rhode Island, the Block Island scheme off Rhode Island, is cable infrastructure reliability. 70% of insurance claims in the City of London, the world centre of insurance, are in place as a result of cable failure. This is in the offshore wind in space. other types of technology failure within the offshore wind system, that's not so prominent. It's the cables which continue to cause the problems. So cable infrastructure is a fantastic place to start looking at innovative products and services. And Peter's already mentioned the arrival of JDR cables into the New England area, and that type of conversation is permanently ongoing. So there's a number of innovation vectors, which I call them, which have been put in place over the years. Through the Science and Innovation Network of the UK government, we've had fantastic university collaboration. So Durham, Strathclyde, Plymouth, alongside Tufts, UMass, Maine, University of Rhode Island, and University of Colorado Boulder have all taken their part in the development of the relationships at an academic level. I've already mentioned National Laboratory Joint Working. NREL continues to work with what's now the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult in the UK, which I helped the government set up in 2012. That replaced the National Renewable Energy Centre. But the relationships persist across the pond. We've already been involved both sides of the pond in fast-tracking digital, artificial intelligence, and unmanned aerial vehicle type technologies for the inspection of wind farms. And we've also put micro businesses and small to medium enterprises in touch with each other to facilitate that transfer of understanding and technology. And the Rhode Island Innovation Hub is a fantastic example of where that's starting to germinate. I've mentioned, well, Peter mentioned the joint UK-US government facilitation of R&D. There exists the National Offshore Wind R&D Collaborative, which is the vector which is driving US R&D in the offshore wind space, which Tufts and Woodhull Institute are firmly behind. On the UK side, Innovate UK is doing its bit, and we've got sister projects at play now, which are looking at things like reliability of turbines. Block Island is going to be instrumented with the next generation of sensors, and that's going to be compared with an equivalent instrumentation in the UK and the data exchanged. So some of the areas where we continue to collaborate and where there's massive opportunity are optimization of planning, which is the picture on the left, which is the logistics of getting from the port to the construction point or the servicing point of an offshore wind farm. The construction of the offshore wind farm is extremely important. The quicker we can construct, the more reliable we can construct, the earlier the power starts to be generated, and the quicker the return on investment, and the lower the levelized cost of energy. I mentioned in the levelized cost of energy equation discussion about yield. Now, yield is basically how much can you get out of your turbines based upon what they feel. So a turbine will feel a flow of air over it, the turbine will spin, and then it will produce energy. But if that air is not of a particular type, i.e. it's very turbulent, picture 3 in front of you is it's called turbulent buffeting. If that turbulence is very, very aggressive, then the downstream turbines don't perform optimally and the yield reduces. So that's a site called Horns Rev off the coast of Denmark. And this is an example of flow field interaction, which you want to try and avoid. So huge opportunities to look at turbine wake interaction, this is called. And NREL is one of the global leaders out of Golden, Colorado in doing just this type of work. And it is collaborating as we speak with Durham University to perfect some of its models. And I've also already mentioned the cabling challenges which we all have. And the big challenge for cables is to monitor them in situ, i.e. what's going on with the cable at any one time. But all of this leads to skills development, training, workforce opportunities, new venture creation, supply chain opportunities to come in to help with sensoring, help with construction, help with planning. So you can see the myriad of jobs and opportunities which starts to emerge as we start to perfect and investigate some of these key science, engineering, and economic challenges. Next slide, please. This is the 2 slides to go. This is the opportunity space as I see it for the United States. We've mentioned a lot about the sector as it exists today. This is the next frontier, floating offshore wind. So we're talking about turbines which exist in deeper waters. So if you look at that diagram on the slide, you'll see that to the right, you've got 3 turbines which are fixed to the seabed. So there's a gravity-based foundation on the right, which effectively weight keeps it on the seabed. There's a jacket structure, which is very similar to an oil and gas platform in the middle. And there's a monopile, which is the one just before the continental shelf cuts in. But as the water goes deeper, then it gives you opportunities to effectively tether your turbine to the seabed in the deeper water, but for the turbine to effect float. There are, of course, control systems which manage that flotation process, but nevertheless, it's effectively a floating asset. This immediately lends itself to the use of skills which are indigenous skills which exist off the coast, the northeast coast of the UK, and also in the Gulf of Mexico, in particular in the United States. So what we're seeing is the opportunity to transfer oil and gas thinking into the ocean environment in relation to floating offshore wind. It's important to say that the further you get offshore, the better the wind profiles, i.e. more consistent and bigger wind speeds, which means that you are able to generate a greater amount of power, which, back to the levelized cost of energy, it lowers the levelized cost of energy. So floating offshore wind has a lot to offer as the industry advances in the United States. 2 sets of skills, as I mentioned: United States, Houston, Oklahoma, Gulf of Mexico in particular, the UK, Aberdeen, Newcastle, Teesside, big engineering and service industry centers of excellence for oil and gas. These skills are directly applicable to these floating assets, and we're now seeing the recognition of this through the introduction of the oil and gas majors into the sector. So Shell, BP, and more recently Chevron, which is a big statement in terms of the US and its intent, have come into the industry and are taking a serious look at how they effectively get involved in this sector, having left it behind for so many years. On top of that, we're seeing state oil companies coming in: Saudi Aramco, Petrobras in Brazil, in Petronas in Malaysia. Extremely well capitalized businesses who can afford to get into the industry at the right price point, as we're seeing now, but with the right technologies starting to emerge. Huge balance sheet strength and liquidity, which is what the floating offshore wind market needs. And the liquidity markets in the United States further lend themselves to this industry becoming a US-centric industry, i.e. floating offshore wind. So huge export potential in years to come if the lead position is established. Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, no real indigenous oil and gas industries, but a huge demand for floating offshore wind expertise. So that's likely to see the US companies that go down this avenue with great global expansion opportunity. We're already seeing a massive amount, and historically there's been a massive amount of work going on at NREL in the University of Maine around the floating agenda, and that's continuing apace. But I've gone on record, this is not new, I've gone on record as saying that I believe that the United States will be the global leader in floating offshore wind within 15 years. Next slide, please. So in summary, the levelized cost of energy dominates the offshore wind sector, and it's really important to have an understanding of what it means. So I've been developing these relationships, as I've said, over 16 to 17 years, and it's a true delight to be in the position that I am now, being able to push and pull at the same time and influence and support the United States industry. 2 very fundamental starting points were the relationships between the national labs across in the US and in the UK. So National Renewable Energy Centre, UK, Wind Technology Testing Centre, which was part of NREL at the time, it's now part of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Centre, under the collaborative R&D agreement, which was signed in 2006. So these relationships have been blossoming over that period. I've mentioned the Power US consortium, which was formed and which has subsequently become the National Offshore Wind R&D Collaborative. And also there was a serious UK input into the work which NYSERDA was doing at the early stages in New York via the Carbon Trust and the Renewables Consulting Group, who are both British organisations. We forged the academic linkages through the UK Science and Innovation Network. They've been mentioned by Peter. Here they are again. The big universities who are active in the offshore wind space, meeting those who are active in the northeast of the USA. The consulates and the embassy in the US has been a huge resource for this facilitation. I was part of a inward mission of 3 persons in 2011, which did the rounds at the Department of Energy, did the rounds at the testing center in Boston, and also did the rounds at the LeadCo development in Cleveland, Ohio. And it was superbly positioned to help the US emergent academics and emergent project developers crystallize their thinking, and it worked extremely well. And it was a further example of sowing the seed of collaboration. I've talked about the bilateral funding agreement, so I won't go over that. The UK-US relationships are at the heart of Bristol Community College's National Offshore Wind Institute. Maersk Training is Danish, but its team that's been deployed is firmly British. And that's working extremely well. There are aspects to it which will evolve and will further evolve in time, but there are other aspects which will drop off as the National Offshore Wind Institute takes on its own identity. But as it stands at the moment, the partnership is in place for 3 years, and we expect it to blossom over that period of time. This time next year, we will be open for business, and we will be training our first set of technicians. So it's a golden age of offshore wind for the United States. The floating agenda is extremely important, as I've mentioned, and global leadership could be established through that. And I predict that by 2036, the US exports in the floating offshore wind sector will be significant, if not outstripping the exports which it actually has in the fixed bottom offshore wind space, which also I expect to develop as well as it gets to grips. Its indigenous supply chain is developed, and the jobs which we want to come to the US start to come to the US through this early stage technology transfer being rooted, and then it's spawning the people of the future to drive the industry forward from the United States. And I'll leave it on that citation. That's a good report to read because it actually takes the offshore wind agenda to the next degree of complexity, which is the impact on the power system along the eastern seaboard, which is a really important factor. And we've already seen that the acknowledgement of this importance through the federal government acknowledging it needs to fund some of that infrastructure pretty quickly. So for those of you who are inclined, that report is worth reading. There are others. Please get in touch if you want to have other reference materials passed your way. I'd be delighted to do that. And I think, just try the next slide, Rona, would you please? That's it. Thank you very much. I hope that was of use. It's one man's journey through over the last 17 years through a very complex and at times very challenging web, because the industries, both sides of the pond, have waxed and waned over that period. But we're here to stay now, and long may it last. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alan Loudon, for your sharing your expertise and the work that you have been doing for such a long time in the offshore wind industry, which is a brand new industry here in the United States. And I agree with you, based upon what I've seen. We're going to see the United States become very much a leader in this industry, and you know, the opportunity for the creation of jobs and economic development is just immense. Not only that, but also the reduction in carbon emissions, obviously. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have Melanie on. She is the Deputy Chief Executive of Renewable UK, which supports more than 400 corporate members in the wind, wave, and tidal energy industries. Her role includes helping Renewable UK's supply chain members to grow and developing the skilled workforce the industry needs, including opening up wider areas of the sector to more women. Ms. On is a former Labour MP for Great Grimsby, serving from May of 2015 to November of 2019. So she knows the political push and tug of creating a new industry and what happens and the concerns that come forward from constituents that we all have. And so let us listen now to Melanie On. It's all yours.
Thank you, Senator Pacheco. It's a pleasure to join you and to hear the enthusiasm around the offshore wind sector. I'm conscious that there are questions coming through, and hopefully we'll have a good opportunity to talk through some of those towards the end of the session. But I'm also hoping that some of the comments that I make today might address some of those for the attendees, because we've got a good number of attendees and they're very pertinent questions and they're the right questions to be asking. So I'll just give you a little bit more background on Renewable UK. Absolutely, it's a trade association for renewable technologies, and as Senator Pacheco just referenced, that we focus on onshore, offshore and floating offshore wind, tidal and wave. But increasingly, we're also talking about storage and hydrogen, because they're both so closely linked to the continued success of our growing wind market. We've got now around 450 members. We've grown substantially over the last 18 months. And unusually that includes large owners and operators that many of you will have heard of, hopefully the Ørsteds, Equinors, Vattenfalls and Iberdrolas. But we have about half of our membership made up of supply chain members. So we have some of the big players in supply chain, Siemens, Gamesa, Vestas, GE, but also SMEs. It's interesting to hear JDR Cables mentioned in Dr. Loudon's contribution. They are a significant member of Renewable UK, but we have companies like Osbit who design and build bespoke equipment for use offshore, Schneider Electrics who provide switch gear for nacelles in turbines. They're all rooted in the UK, in some of the areas that are not traditionally seen as being economic powerhouses, but have certainly been given a new lease of life through the wind industry. And we have a whole range of other companies like those who are in health and safety, planning specialists, environmental specialists, vessel transfer providers. It is an incredibly broad membership, and I'm sure that you will understand that in that broad membership, often there can be tensions within that. So it has given us a bit of a test about where those competing priorities have led us. At the moment, we are very much firmly on the side of expanding the supply chain. We've had a huge amount of focus on establishing the industry and growing it from its infancy about a decade ago to growing it now to some of the comments that we heard earlier from the British Consulate contribution was about 60% of UK energy being provided by wind, both onshore and offshore. And we've really seen a huge growth in offshore wind, particularly in the past 5 years, which coincidentally kind of coincided with my period of time as a Member of Parliament. And Renewable UK is a fantastic association to work for because it is involved in some incredibly exciting work. We see our members at the absolute forefront of brand new technology and looking at problem solving, overcoming significant challenges, and responding to significant government demand, because renewables really is where it is at the moment for our government. They are putting a huge amount of focus on the post-COVID economic recovery. They've got a green industrial strategy. I know that these will be common conversations internationally. We saw that at the G7. We will see it again in November at COP26, with new international targets being set for reductions in carbon emissions and an expectation, I think, of an increase in pace from all of those leading nations, particularly because the UK is hosting COP26. If we look at the recent announcements on domestic expectation and domestic policy, certainly that gives me the sense that direction will be about increasing the pace of decarbonisation across the world. So really my standout message is there isn't going to be any escaping net zero. We have to confront the fact that the energy transition is happening and will continue to happen. We cannot reach net zero or dramatically reduce our carbon emissions and tackle the implications of climate change if we do not fulfill the requirements of that energy transition and move away from those traditional fossil fuels into clean, green energy. And as Senator Pacheco mentioned, I previously was a member of Parliament. I don't know whether you can just see above my head, there's my copy of my maiden speech, my very first speech that I ever made in Parliament, all bound up very nicely with the portcullis crest on there. And I was elected in 2015 for the seat of Great Grimsby, and Grimsby is my hometown. And I did run in 3 elections before eventually and unfortunately losing in December 2019. Now, I see that there have been questions about the fishing industry. And for those of you who don't know, Grimsby has traditionally been known for its fishing industry, and that remains an enormous part of its identity. It tends to be a reference point for how well or poorly people feel the area is doing. So if it thinks that we're not doing very well, oh, we used to have thousands of trawlers sat in our docks. I don't think there ever were thousands. The docks isn't big enough for that, but nostalgia dictates the story. So thousands of trawlers in the dock, you know, providing jobs for tens of thousands of people, which is accurate. Why can't we have something like that again? If the area feels like it's doing well, that becomes much less of a conversation. And if we look at the realities for the town, the height of Grimsby's fishing industry was in the 1950s, and that's when people made a lot of money. But in the 1970s, it experienced the cod wars with Iceland, where Iceland extended its fishing limits to around 200 miles, which impacted the access of to Iceland's waters of many of Grimsby's trawlers, not just Grimsby's trawlers, I have to say. There was an impact on many fishing communities as a result, and so there was a lot of diversification that had to happen. And there is as I've got a US audience, there's an interesting Grimsby US angle to this phenomenon that changed the nature of that traditional industry, because the MP for Grimsby at the time was a man called Tony Crossland, and he was also the Foreign Secretary. And while he was Foreign Secretary, he met with Henry Kissinger when he was Secretary of State, and they agreed, which apparently, allegedly, in local folklore, at a meeting while they were attending a Grimsby Town football match at the local football ground at Blundell Park, they agreed that to preserve the unity of NATO, because the US had a space for an airbase in Iceland, that he would accept Iceland's 200-mile limit. And it's caused long-standing resentment and frustration, and had a dramatic effect on the UK's fishing industry. And I tell you that because it just goes to show things do happen and things affect communities in lots of different ways, some more predictable or unpredictable than others. But more recently, Grimsby's gone through a process of change and re-identification, which, while some communities in Maine particularly are going to be going through this similar change, I thought it would be useful as a touch point, I suppose, to explain how it has worked and worked well for this small town of about 70,000 residents. So Grimsby in 2019 was actually named the UK's wind capital for the amount of offshore wind that was being generated in sites off its very blustery coastline. And as a result of the decision by Ørsted and E.ON back in the mid-2000s to build their turbines off the east coast of England and run their operations from Grimsby, it's led to a whole host of new opportunities. So not only for this area are there brand new jobs in an exciting industry, but it has resulted in private investment into the local port. So that's been really important to the local area because it houses the town's emblematic dock tower, as well as a number of other industrially and culturally significant buildings that were slowly falling into disrepair as a portside location became less relevant, frankly, to new businesses. But thankfully that started to turn around, and we see scallop and crab trawlers landing into Grimsby alongside the crew transfer vessels that are taking engineers out to the farms. And because of the increase in the number of seafaring vessels in use, a new maritime college has been established to engage young people in Grimsby's traditional skills of seafaring, which were dying out, knowing that there are a growing number of jobs in this sector requiring skills that will be operated in the local area. And the locationing of the operations and maintenance bases have offered assurances to local people that longevity of employment is possible, because those services will be required for at least 25 years. That is the lifespan of a wind farm before decommissioning, replacement even starts to be discussed. And it's brought additional investment from large supply chain manufacturers that are making blades. So within an hour there's direct employment opportunities for over 700 people, and those are entry-level opportunities as well, and that is going to double in the next couple of years for this area. And up in Allen's neck of the woods further north in the Teesside area, an announcement's been made for a brand new blades factory there, which is going to again provide employment for at least 700 people directly, but more widely with all of the ancillary jobs, you're looking at another 2,000 jobs that will be created. So boosting the local economies of some areas that have really struggled for a long time. And the area is looking better. When I was the MP, I felt really strongly that people of the area needed to feel invested in, and that how things look is a reflection of how people feel, because that's how they feel invested in. And I thought that offshore wind would bring new opportunities and make the town talked about in positive terms, not in the annual crap towns review, which is where it generally was found, and that it would bring a renewed sense of pride and purpose for people, because we'd be known for something new and something innovative, and actually playing a positive role in the world's environmental challenge, our tiny town actually having a practical role in dealing with climate change. And local leaders heard that. They've used their convening powers. The Team Humber Marine Alliance is kind of part of that wider partnership group that was all part and parcel of bringing together a delivery group to drive change in the local community and maximise every opportunity that was available. And to date, we've got around £87 million of inward government investment, which will provide new student facilities as part of a new university offer that's being planned, and a new youth facility and enhanced cultural offer, as well as the nice bit of a facelift that was needed. So unfortunately for me, people in the area are feeling very positive. They feel very positive about the sector, and I think that that positivity and feeling listened to, which has done me no favours, partly led to me losing my seat. And we see that in other post-industrial areas of the UK that have no longer got industries like steelworks or coal mining. They similarly embrace offshore wind and renewables more generally as a positive influence. Unfortunately, it also seems to lead them to vote Conservative, which is sad. But that isn't the case around the whole of the country. There are a range of current issues that are becoming more prominent, particularly as the sector grows. There are expectations that we'll deliver 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. We currently deliver around 12. So the ambitions are really high, and they get higher nearly every time the Prime Minister goes on TV to talk about it, whether it's about capacity, numbers of jobs, or the UK supply chain. There are displacements and disruptions happening, which cause those with vested interest, and I say vested interest without any negative connotations, whether it's traditional energy sources or environmentalists or any other industries, it does cause them concern. And generally, the reaction is to say, stop all of that. We don't want it because it's going to disrupt what it is that we're doing. And I think that we have had the opportunity to learn from some of the mistakes, which essentially for every single one of those issues is early engagement, because we've got a number of different programs now where we work very closely with environmentalists, where we work closely with lobby groups, where we work closely with fisheries industries and other maritime sectors where sea usage is at a premium. And there are even things in place now where companies will liaise with local fishing communities to make sure that they're aware of every anticipated action coming up on a weekly basis where there is going to be activity between shore and the turbine site, which I think is key really to making sure that people do not feel that they are being unnecessarily displaced. I think that there is also a responsibility upon legislators to accept that these changes are coming, that to make sure that they happen and happen well is critical. And that means that you have to reinforce the support for the industry whilst accepting that there may well be issues, but identifying those issues early based on evidence, because very often it's based on anecdote rather than on evidence. So I saw one of the questions about floating offshore wind and impact on Wales was in there. Well, let's see what's happening in Taiwan with their floating offshore wind systems and their floating offshore wind farms. Let's get the evidence to make sure that we are in a position to overcome and challenge some of those difficulties, because the industry is really willing to be active in trying to overcome them. Everybody who is in the industry is there because they are a keen environmentalist, because they want to tackle climate change. It's not just a job for people. So they want to be a force for good. And that's not only, I mean, in the UK, we've got about 26,000 people who are working in offshore wind at the moment. We expect that to grow massively to nearly 70,000 by 2026. So it's not just about providing those opportunities, but it's about making sure that we do it in a holistic and fair way, and make sure that we engage well across all sectors to make sure that we deliver it in a sensitive way. I'll leave it there because I know that we are struggling on time.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Melanie, for your experience and bringing that knowledge to each and every legislator that is tuned in. I would like to let all the legislators know that we are allowing everyone to come on for the question and answer period now. It's going to take a few minutes for that to happen. But as we are doing that, we have had some questions in the chat. And the first one was from a Lauren Ford. Is the U.S. In the U.S. we are experiencing resistance to offshore wind farms, mostly from the fishing industry. Did the UK experience similar resistance? From which sources, and what was done to mitigate the concerns? I assume the UK continued research, and what have been lessons learned in the UK? We just heard a little bit of that from Melanie, but I would like to open it up, Melanie, for you to react, or for Peter or Alan to react to that question.
Shall I give it a break because I've just spoken for quite a long time? Shall I hand over to Peter?
Okay, Peter.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Senator. Yeah, I mean, just a few comments on fishing. I mean, the short answer to that question is yes. We have certainly experienced, I think, around the UK, conflict between the fishing industry and the offshore wind and renewables industry, but it's not an insurmountable conflict. And I think Melanie set out really persuasively some of the ways that you can kind of get around that. I think the first thing I would say is we've tried to kind of institutionalize some of the responses to that issue. There's a group set up in the UK called FLOW, FLOWW. It stands for Fishing Liaison with Offshore Wind and Wet Renewables. It doesn't really trip off the tongue. But this is a group that is set up with something called the Crown Estate. And in the UK, the seabed, I think for about 12 miles around the whole of the United Kingdom, is owned by the Crown, by the Queen, and so they control the rights to that seabed. And the Crown Estate, working through this group called FLOW, has helped bring the fishing industry and the offshore wind industry together into a sort of productive dialogue, and that has proved, I think, very fruitful, and that continues to work to bring those two industries together. There was another group that I really liked the concept. Unfortunately, it closed in 2020. It was a group called West of Morecambe. And this was a group that was set up, a voluntary group that was set up that managed contributions of money from the offshore wind industry into a fund that was then managed by the local fishing industry. So that the local fishing industry could take the contribution from the offshore wind industry and put it into skills development, renovating boats, upskilling the community. And so it was really, it came up with some really innovative solutions to actually show how the money from the offshore wind industry was benefiting the local fishing community. And I think that's one of the key obstacles you have to get over. Lots of us talk about the economic dividend of the offshore wind industry, but until you can actually show it in concrete terms to fishermen who are worried about their jobs and their careers, I think you will struggle. But there are lots of things that we've done. We've looked at ways of enabling fishing within offshore wind farms, so setting up cable-free corridors, for example. We've looked at establishing best practice guides for compensation schemes that the offshore wind industry puts into the fishing industry, and looked very closely at alternative employment, so guardian and safety roles, environmental monitoring. We've seen fishing communities, fishermen, fisherwomen going into those alternative industries in the UK that actually support the offshore wind industry. I would say we have the consulate. We spoke recently to a lady called Claire Haggett. She's at the University of Edinburgh, and she's one of the UK's pioneering voices on the fishing, the links between the fishing industry and the offshore wind industry. And she's got some really, really interesting research that she's been doing on the ground with fishing communities. So if anyone is interested, Claire Haggett, Dr. Claire Haggett at the University of Edinburgh, it would be very, very well placed to advise.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Peter. Thank you. Alan, I think I'm going to skip down to, because there's a couple questions that are in the chat. By the way, you should be, anyone that's watching, you should be able to join us. And there's a representative, Mike Yantachka from Charlotte. I may be mispronouncing your name. I apologize for that. But he writes here, what effect will wind turbine have on ongoing shipping? We've touched on fishing and other boating activities. Who would like to take that?
I'm quite happy to. I mean, with the institutionalization that Peter talked about has really been very useful. So the Crown Estate again is acting as a convening function at the moment, and has got a new program called the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Program that is bringing together maritime users of all descriptions, but also onshore environmentalists alongside the wind industry to look at the prioritising issues that might be affecting one or the other in terms of industry, and overcoming those barriers by having a strong research program, because the outcome of that research will feed into how wind farms are constructed and operated in the future. So we're doing very strong active engagement to minimise disruption.
Yeah, I think one of the other points which needs to be borne in mind is that the build out of the UK offshore wind industry has been in 4 phases, or 5 phases, called rounds 1, rounds 2, rounds 2.5, round 3, and round 4. And progressively, the industry has moved further offshore, and that's allowed a logical and incremental series of analyses to be performed about the effects of advancing further into the ocean. So I think it's not a case of just starting the industry, over the horizon, which is where it is now. It's been a progressive move to de-risk it over the last 15 years or so. So I think there's the parallels with the United States. They're significant, but there are differences in the way that the industries have emerged. So I think the evidence-based approach of the UK, what Peter and Melanie have described, in the use of science and engineering, is extremely important to building up that confidence in the sector over that time period. And I think we will see that out of necessity occurring in the United States as well, because it's a stakeholder engagement play, this, and that stakeholder group has increased in size globally as this industry has advanced.
Thank you, Alan. And one question comes from David Michael, talking about what's happening with floating turbines and the impact on whales, in terms of with the direct line. I know that there's been some discussion here in Massachusetts about that, and looking at what has happened in other places around the world and how that has been resolved. The floating turbines, I think a lot of people are not aware that, for example, on the west coast of our country, it would be much more optimum for floating turbines to be out there because of the deep water. Just a reaction to those issues or lessons learned around that, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, there's huge lessons to be learned from the way that oil and gas platforms are tethered to the ocean bed. This is not something which isn't understood from an engineering point of view. It's the case of where these are sited versus the impact on the aquatic life in that vicinity. That's the unknown at this stage. So from an engineering point of view, there shouldn't be any problems. It's an adaptation of existing technology. But as Melanie said, the evidence base is building in other markets. And so we need to cast our net adrift further afield to be able to capture that data and understand what's going on. The French are producing floating offshore wind farms in the Bay of Biscay. That's a very aggressive ocean environment. So data will be valuable there coming into the design of the systems in the United States. So I think it's evidence-based. The University of Maine has got a huge role to play in this. NREL is doing a fantastic job in terms of its research in the floating sector. So it's a time-based effect that we're looking to put in place here. It needs time to get the evidence from the research and demonstration sites to be able to build up the evidence as to what we do and how we do it. There's no magic bullet to fire at this point in time.
We have a ranking member of the Science and Technology and Energy Committee in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. Peter, are you able to get on right now?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. This is a very interesting conversation, and I'm also by profession a physicist. So I've been following this whole topic very closely, and I appreciate all the interesting input. And as actually the only scientist on that committee, I'm so glad to have the expertise that the people here provided. And at the same time, the political expertise that Melanie mentioned about how to deal with resistance from different industries who feel threatened. But what I put in as a question is, I'd like to have some comments about the idea of hydrogen in connection with offshore wind, and how the panelists think about the future of a hydrogen economy in general.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'll let the panelists, answer. Any response to that in terms of hydrogen?
I'm happy to start, Senator, although, Peter, I will preface my remarks by saying that I am not an expert in what is quite a technical field, and I hope Alan and Melanie may be more expert than I am. But what I would say is I think you've put your finger on the next horizon for offshore wind, the next sort of scientific horizon for offshore wind. I think hydrogen will be absolutely fundamental to our economies. The UK has placed a pretty big bet on hydrogen actually, and we've got the government is publishing its hydrogen strategy in the next couple of weeks. We've committed billions of public funding to financing research into green hydrogen, clean hydrogen. And we are in our national targets for offshore wind. We're committing, I think, for 1 gigawatt of our offshore wind capacity to be linked to clean hydrogen. So making some pretty big bets. There are some really interesting research projects going on in hydrogen in the UK. I just mentioned the Gigastack project, which is probably the most well known, and that's looking at really significant levels of storage associated with hydrogen. And I think, if I'm not misunderstanding the technology, I think one of the great benefits that hydrogen storage brings is the ability to move electricity from offshore wind platforms to the mainland without the requirement for cabling. And I think, going back to the previous question about the fishing industry, if you don't have cables connecting the turbines to the land, then you get rid of one of the major objections, I think, from the fishing industry and from other industries that are affected by the cabling. So I think it's huge potential, but Alan and Melanie may be able to add more, or indeed correct what I've said.
Okay, Peter, thank you. And Alan, Melanie?
Well, I would correct you. I mean, the opposition from communities around cabling as well is becoming a significant issue that hasn't been addressed up front in the way that it ought to have done. But yes, I mean, I think actually I'd go further to say that, you can, in the UK, you can foresee a limit on wind. You can foresee a limit on wind if we do not resolve the storage situation, and we do not resolve that issue. Mm-hmm. So a combination of hydrogen and other storage facilities absolutely has to be part of the consideration. So the government approach to that is essential. There also then needs to be some decisions, or perhaps it will just evolve actually, but how that hydrogen is really going to work in practice, because I think at the moment there are a vast range of different understandings and expectations of how hydrogen will be used, some in a domestic setting, some in commercial settings, some in public sector settings, and until we see the realistic scope and use of hydrogen, and it is at such early stages, we haven't really got there yet. What is it going to be used for? What will it be an active replacement for? That I think is a bit of a limitation on allowing the policy to flourish. But unless we get that right, I think that wind has some problems.
I'll let David Michael has a question that was referenced earlier and still feels as though it's not being totally responded to in terms of the whales. Are you able to join us?
Yes, thank you, Senator Pacheco. And I apologize. I actually lowered my hand.
We just said, before you begin, we just have just a few minutes left in the program. I want to try to get as many questions in as possible. So I'd ask those that are going to have questions to be brief, and those with answers to be brief as well. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Senator. So it's David Michel, I'm a state rep in Connecticut. I pushed for the creation of the Environmental Standards Commission for offshore wind while we were attempting to pass the procurement in 2019, which passed. So I just went back to the comments on the floating foundations. There are the lobster fishing industry is now looking at new techniques so that they eliminate the vertical lines. So it kind of sounds like we're going backwards by bringing them back. Especially if the lobster fishermen are doing this to protect the whales, then the offshore wind industry should make sure that we pay attention. And to a comment from Melanie on, thank you, by the way, everyone, for your time and sharing all your knowledge from the industry. I just wanted to make a remark that if you did say that a lot of people working in the industry are environmentalists or close to being environmentalists because it's to fight climate change. We will not be fighting climate change if we actually lose whales, for example. We only have, a certain amount.
Well, I would say, you're at more risk of losing whales through climate change. You're at more risk of losing whales through fishing and poor practices in fishing. And unless you stem the tide of climate change, you're going to, you're going to lose more of that wildlife and more of that ecology. And I think, the point is that the point that you're making, I think, is great. Make it now. Well, your point is that you don't want the vertical connection lines, and for the industry to hear that is important. And I don't think that there is any evidence that says industry doesn't listen to issues like that. It's just important to make sure that you've got the right format, right forum.
I didn't say that, Ms. On. I actually did not finish making my point. That was a separate point from the floating turbines. The point was that the whales could be, we lose whales due to vertical lines, but we could lose whales due to sound or noise and pile driving. So I'm not going about the techniques. I'm not talking about that. What I'm trying to say is the fisheries and the marine ecosystem depend on the whales, and so does the phytoplankton in terms of carbon absorption. So if you lose the whales, right, by pile driving at a time when a whale goes by, a pregnant female, or other sort of things, you basically, by losing whales, you're losing actually the front line of defense against climate change. So I am not saying not to go with, I'm not against this industry. Actually, I've worked a lot on some parts of this industry. But I just want to say it would be kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we lost what is currently maintaining our temperatures at the level that they are at, which are the oceans and the marine ecosystem in the ocean. Thank you, everyone. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much for your question and your concerns, and that's shared by many of us. I myself have been one of the people that have filed legislation to try to protect the right whale. So there's a lot of interest in that, and there's also a lot of technology that allows us to coexist in terms of being able to decarbonize. So let us.
If I may add something to what Melanie said, hydrogen has the potential for transportation fuels, for fuel cell vehicles, and for heating homes. So that's a big expansion.
It does. It's just a decision about whether we do that and whether we have the infrastructure to enable that. And decisions haven't been made around that just yet. So we need to do that before we can utilize it.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd ask all the participants, except for the panelists at this time, to please make sure that you're on mute so we can get through the rest of it. I want to turn it over to Senator Formica for a question, if he has any.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. Thank you all to the panelists and for everybody who participated today. My questions again center around the fishing industry and the impact that that's going to have. And I know that there's been talk about mitigating, some of the costs for fishermen in terms of investing in retrofits in their boats and perhaps buying them out. But we have to find a way to make sure that this industry can coexist. And some of the mentions that came up were that flow, FLOW, and then There was another woman that you mentioned, Claire. I didn't get the last name, Mr. Abbott, and if we could make that available. I think, you know, the fishermen here in New England, and, you know, we have such a great fishing habitat here. They don't feel like they're being heard. They're coming to the table, but then the construction is moving forward without some of their concerns. And so while we're in this infancy, having their voices at the table and going to be able to solve these things, I think is going to be important. It sounds like we're on the cusp of technology, especially this hydrogen thing. First I've heard of it, I'm very excited about the transmission of energy resources through that. So I think there's things that we can do, but I want to make sure that everything's on the table in terms of keeping our prolific fishing grounds, you know, active and vibrant.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator. And I think that, let me turn this over to the panel for a reaction, but I think that because the industry is so new here in the United States, you know, we haven't heard the same concerns and the same questions and the same, you know, negotiations that had been very public in the UK and other places around the world with the fishing industry, with environmental concerns, etc. So let me put that back to the panelists, Melanie, Peter, or Alan. Yep.
Thank you. If I may answer this question, and then I'm afraid I have to leave. I have to go and pick up my son, so I need to bring this to a conclusion. But I just wanted to say a couple of things. I mean, the first one, I couldn't agree more with what Melanie said. There's such an irony to me that, you know, the fishing industry, which is facing catastrophic decline because of climate change, is objecting to offshore wind turbines. I mean, it seems to me, I mean, I'm not a fisherman, and I hold my hand up and I say, look, I understand, you know, when people feel under threat, you sort of attack the thing that is closest to you. And I understand the immensely important cultural significance in many places, including in New England, of the fishing industry. But climate change is a far more fundamental threat to the fishing industry than the offshore wind industry will ever be. I think there are also, I think, a number of myths around offshore wind, which really do need to be skewered. I mean, one of them is, which comes up time and time again, is the threat to bird life. And that, you know, supposedly offshore wind and onshore wind farms are a huge threat to bird life. There was a Danish study that showed that for every 10,000 birds that were killed by human activity, less than one of those was due to wind turbines. The mortality rate for birds for wind turbines is far lower than fossil fuel power plants, than office buildings, or even than just the common house cat. So, you know, we need to kind of meet these myths head on and really kind of attack them. A quarter of all bird species could be extinct by 2054 because of climate change. So far more significant threat due to climate change. Just on the marine point, and I make a plug for a British company here. There's a British company called Arc Marine, and they are producing artificial reefs. These are relatively small concrete structures that can be built on the seabed, and they are hollow. And when you build them together, you can use them as the base for a wind turbine, and they actually promote marine mammals to find spaces to live and breed within the base of the turbine. So traditional turbine bases are made of concrete. They're not made of green concrete, which Arc Marine uses, which has zero kind of carbon emissions coming from it. And traditional foundation methods leave just waste all over the seabed, which has a big impact on the ecology of the marine environment. So this company, Arc Marine, are producing these really interesting artificial reefs, which actually promote the marine ecology and the marine environment, as I was saying. I've got to drop off. Senators, both of you, thank you so much indeed for having me. Thank you to the Council of State Governments. This is a really important conversation. And thank you to everybody who has attended. I will drop my email in the chat so you can get in touch if that would be useful. I do apologize for having to drop off early.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for your participation. And to all the people that are participating, In the chat, there are a few links that you might want to take a look at. This recording will be available of the whole program in, I believe, probably by next week. And Rhona will go over that with all of us before we sign off. But any other further comment from Melanie or Alan on the last question?
I've got a comment on the hydrogen subject. And don't underestimate the cost of creating new pipeline infrastructure, onshore pipeline infrastructure to convey hydrogen. It's a different beast to methane. It needs to be respected. It's certainly a different beast to carbon dioxide in its liquid state. So there is a huge infrastructure which needs to be put in place for the hydrogen sector to realize its potential. So bear that in mind with the levelized cost of energy related to hydrogen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. There's a Senator David Senjum. We had one question. No? Okay. I think we've got to all the questions that were in the chat. If there's anyone else that is waiting that would like to ask the question, you can do that at this time. Any further questions?
Yeah, yes.
Who is this?
Harford, I have one.
Yes, Lauren, you had a couple that we answered, so go right ahead if you have another.
This is on a different topic. Our windjammer industry and the downwind turbulence or disruption that it showed on the slide. Is there going to be enough wind farms that it's going to start disrupting any of the sailing industry?
Well, I'll have one of our panelists who have the experience with that answer it, but I can tell you with my couple of trips that I've done in different parts of the world, I've actually seen what I've been told is an increase in sailing, in boating, in touring, to actually go out to the wind turbines to see them. It becomes as part of a tourist site as well. But anyway, a reaction from the panelists?
Yeah, as a fluid dynamicist, you've got a turbine which is 150 meters in the sky, which is effectively creating vortices. The vortices will wash down. It's downstream from where they're created. Who knows where they end up? I mean, it's like flying an aircraft across the ocean. You get eddies which impact the aircraft at various times, hence you get the bumpy ride. It's stochastic, so there's very little predictability within the turbulent buffeting regime. So I think it could be subject to a lot more study, of course, but I think the height of these turbines and the downwash impact, I can't really see it being having a material impact on the ability for people to sail at an ocean level, at sea level.
Yeah, well, I think for dinghies, depending on how far out, I mean, some of these are going very far out, but I think some dinghies have been using them as convenient tacking spots.
Okay, thank you. And the final question, we're going to have Mike, Representative Mike Yantochka. I can't, I'm sorry, Mike. We've seen each other so many times. So many times over the years, and it still gets me. But anyway, the floor is yours.
So my question is, how far offshore do these wind turbines sit, and how far apart are they from each other?
The latest Dogger Bank which is the largest, will be the world's largest wind farm, is being built 130 kilometers off the east coast of England. The I think the generic spacing between turbines is 7 rotor blades, but I suspect that as they get bigger, that may well be changing because the physics around that might be changing.
And how long is a rotor blade?
Oh, well, Alan will live near one of the recent ones. They're about 100 meters.
Yeah, the blade is 100 meters. So the rotor diameter, obviously 200 meters, 250 meters now. So it's big.
Okay, thank you.
But I think it's just to put a bit more context on that. This has been, as I said earlier, an evolution. Initially, there were nearshore sites which were developed, and the learnings were obtained from them that gave the confidence to go further offshore. So Melanie's talking about 100 miles over the horizon type of thing, which is going to be commonplace. So it very much depends upon the logistics and the topography and all of the stuff that we've been debating today, the environmental impact assessments of everything going on as to where these are sited, how far apart they're sited, and also back to my bit, the economics of it. The yield from these turbines is so important to make the financial closure decisions on whether to site them in those particular parts of the ocean. So it's a whole complex web of decision making. So, a big constrained optimization problem is usually the way that these things are tackled.
All right, I would like to just try to bring us to a close now. We're almost 20 minutes over the stop time that we had advertised for everyone, and we're starting to lose people now. But I want to thank all of the panelists for the extraordinary presentations that you've given to all of us. I also want to thank all of the legislators from dozens of states that have joined us for this forum and this webinar. We will have a copy of this available to various members that are on the webinar today. You'll be able to forward this to your colleagues so that they can get access to all the information that has been shared with us today. And let me turn it over to Senator Formica for any closing comments that he may have. And then I want to turn it over to Rhona Cohen just to give us our marching orders from here in terms of how you can access all the information going forward. Senator Formica.
Thank you, Senator. Great job quarterbacking the event today. And I echo your comments about the wonderful presentations by all the speakers. There were answers that came and questions that have arisen. And I think in emerging industries, that's a good thing. And we have to continue to have these conversations so that we can really peel away the layer of the onion, so to speak, so we can get to the heart of the issues and correct a lot of these problems. So I look forward to future conversations, especially around, the cabling. I think that's important, the insurance costs and the laying of that, especially as you're talking about moving farther offshore. We have to kind of protect against the spider web of cabling and, along the ocean floor, and also the efficiency of it. So I'd love to be able to do this again and focus in on some of these other details. But again, I want to echo your words, Senator, about the great presentations that we heard today. And of course, the staff did a wonderful job too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator. And of course, perception and reality are two things that we have in our business all the time in terms of the perception and then the reality of a situation. And we learn that as we go through the whole process, and our panelists are helping us with that. Rhona Cohen, are you with us? And can you tell us what we need to know in terms of making sure we can get a copy of the recording of today's program and any other wrap up information that you may have for us.
Yes, thank you, Senator Pacheco and Senator Formica. Thank you for your terrific leadership on this committee. And thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. This was really a terrific discussion. And we've been talking about offshore wind for about 10 years here at CSG, but obviously things are speeding up quickly, and this is a really, really exciting time for us. And you've raised so many issues that we haven't even begun to tackle. So we really do have our marching orders laid out for us. And this is just the beginning of an ongoing discussion that we are going to be having in the coming months here. And so we will be in touch with you regarding our future programming. First thing I can tell you, there will be a recording available on our website of this session today, probably by Friday, if not Monday at the latest. And you will all be getting a link so that you can check it out. And if for some reason you don't hear from us, it will be on our website under events. And I also want to just give you a heads up about some of our future programming that we already have set up. So our virtual annual meeting is going to be the week of August 16th. And on August 17th, we will have our Energy and Environment Committee programming. Everybody is welcome to attend. We'll have a keynote address from Tony Seba. He's a Stanford University professor and a futurist, and he's going to be talking about clean disruption of energy and transportation and agriculture. And that's actually an encore event. Tony Seba did speak to us 3 years ago, and some of you will remember. He's extremely provocative, so I urge you all to join us. And also on August 17th, our Energy and Environment Committee is going to be meeting again, and we are going to be talking more about a lot of issues related to the clean energy transition. And so we don't have a detailed agenda yet, but I will get that out to folks as soon as we have that, probably within the next week or so. So thank you all. Thank you again. And another shout out to our panelists and to Kristen Kelleher at the British Consulate in Boston for really helping to set up this really terrific session. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Rhona. Thank you for all of your outstanding work and the staff as well. And just two more comments, if they have any, and Melody and Alan. Any final words to the legislators?
I just think that leadership is really important. If you're ready to get behind it, then get behind it and champion it. Because every time you come up with a negative or you come up with a difficulty and you don't present a solution, it sets you back in policy terms, because you do need buy-in. You need buy-in from the local communities that are going to either be positively or potentially slightly negatively affected, but also the other industries around. And it does take people being brave and people being understanding and supportive in the conversations that are being had to drive these things forward. Otherwise, you risk a loss of confidence.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Alan?
Yeah, my request would be get as much brain power on this subject as early as possible, because it's the brains that are going to actually unearth the solutions which we've talked about this afternoon. So the support for the academic community, the national labs, the community college element of that is critical in terms of stimulating that interest. The STEM agenda, all of those things need to be at the fore of people's minds to underpin this, what will be the next industrial revolution, no pun intended, in the United States.
Thank you. I'll just emphasize your last point. We are on the cusp of a sustainability revolution. There is no question about that. It's not just offshore wind. Offshore wind's a big part of it. But when we look at what's going to happen in the transportation sector, and as we heard from Rhona, Tony Seba is going to talk about that, and it's exciting to see what's happening there with other types of renewable energy technologies. We need to decarbonize, or we will experience the worst effects of global climate change, and that's not going to be good for our species. So thank you very much for tuning in. I thank all of you, and we're going to sign off now. Thank you very, very much.